Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about alcohol. And basically when we refer to alcohol is ethanol or ethyl alcohol, which is the dietary component that people consume, either in fermented, for example, beer, wine, or cider, or distilled alcoholic beverage, and distilled being rum, vodka, whiskey, tequila, and cachaça, for instance. So, with regards to energy, 1 gram of ethanol yields 7 kilocalories. So the important thing that we need to know is that alcohol, or ethanol specifically, is readily absorbed through the entire GI tract. And also it's transported without being altered in the bloodstream. And basically the liver is the organ that metabolizes ethanol. In fact, 80% of an ingested ethanol reaches the liver, with the remaining 20% going to other tissues, and that includes the brain. So most of it basically is metabolized or should be metabolized by the liver. For breaking down of ethanol, we have 2 main enzymes. So the first enzyme is called alcohol dehydrogenase, abbreviated as ADH. And the other one is the microsomal ethanol oxidizing system, also known as meals. So the way how it happens is that when ethanol enters the liver, as we can see here, so we have both systems, ADH and meals. So what happens is that ethanol is converted into a molecule called acetaldehyde. And now acetaldehyde can escape the liver, and it's as it is, and get into the blood. But mostly what happens is that acetaldehyde enters the mitochondria. So in the mitochondrial liver, there is another enzyme called acetaldehyde dehydrogenase, which is ALDH abbreviated here. So what ALDH does is convert acetaldehyde into acetate. And again, if you all remember, acetate is that 2-carbon molecule that can be converted into acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA can be oxidized, so it produces CO2, and it can be used in muscles, it can be done in liver. This pathway is very active in the liver, and the liver is the organ that really does most of the work here. But we can also get, once it's in the form of acetate, it can be metabolized by other organs and tissues. So there is a limit to how much the liver can actually handle at any point in time, or per hour, if you will. So the excess intake results in an increase or a rise in blood alcohol concentrations, and this can cause intoxication. On average, women have smaller body sizes and obviously more fat mass than men. And this translates in a smaller liver to metabolize ethanol and less body water to dilute ethanol. So for that reason, women generally display lower tolerance for alcohol than men and are at higher risk of toxic effects in the liver. What is alcohol toxicity? So the oxidation of ethanol via ADH in meals, remember those 2 oxidative systems, produce significant amounts of acetaldehyde. Remember that intermediary molecule before it becomes acetate. So an acetaldehyde is very toxic, or even probably more toxic than ethanol itself. Acetaldehyde is highly reactive, and it exerts adverse metabolic effects. And it does so by covalently binding to proteins, nucleotides, and phospholipids. And it forms what is called adducts, or the addition of 2 molecules. And the implication of the adducts is that impair the function of the molecule to which acetaldehyde is bound to. For instance, is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin, as we learned many times, is an important protein to carry oxygen. But if you have acetaldehyde binding to it, forming an adduct, it really impairs the ability of red blood cells to transport and deliver oxygen to organs and tissues. So ethanol enters the hepatocyte. Meals and ADH convert ethanol into acetaldehyde. So now acetaldehyde enters the mitochondria. In the mitochondria, acetaldehyde dehydrogenase converts it into acetate. acetate gets into acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA in the Krebs cycle is converted into CO2 water, and obviously it can release also NADH and FADH2. Those are used for energy production in the electron transport chain. But we also mentioned that acetaldehyde can accumulate, and acetaldehyde can form what we call adducts. These adducts, they bind to multiple molecules, including DNA, and can cause damage to DNA, and this can lead to cancer. So hepatic cancer is a major complication associated with alcoholism. But acetaldehyde can also promote insulin resistance, because it can also impair the ability of insulin to bind to its receptor, forming an adduct with insulin or even with the receptor, and that impairs the ability of insulin to signal, so they can cause insulin resistance. It can also lead to inflammation, and this is not only acetaldehyde, but ethanol itself. Also, when it's in large amounts, it may lead to an inflammatory response. So all these things can lead to, again, insulin resistance. Now, another feature of ethanol, and this is an important thing because it's very common in alcoholics, is that when there is a lot of ethanol being processed, forming acetaldehyde and then entering the mitochondria to become acetate, the Krebs cycle has only a limited capacity to oxidize all the acetate that is coming in. So what happens is that in the first reaction of the Krebs cycle, acetate condenses with oxaloacetate and forms citrate. So citrate can exit the mitochondria because there's too many of them, and the Krebs cycle cannot handle them all at once. So citrate exits the mitochondria, goes into the cytoplasm. Now, the cytoplasm, there is an enzyme called ATP citrate lyase that breaks down citrate and releases acetyl-CoA. So now acetyl-CoA is a substrate for the de novo lipid synthesis that we abbreviate here as DNL. So this means that your liver will use a large amount of those originally ethanol molecules that entered the hepatocyte to form fatty acids, form lipids. And this is what's called de novo lipid synthesis. So there is a large accumulation of lipids in the liver, and it is called steatosis or hepatic steatosis. And can also, depending on how much you accumulate, it can cause a condition called fatty liver disease. So the liver also, the hepatocyte also takes those fatty acids, put them into a VLDL. Remember the molecule or the lipoprotein that arises from the liver, and this can go to the blood, is exported in the blood, and can lead to dyslipidemia. And another thing is that some of those fatty acids can also be released and be increased its concentration in the circulation. So you can see that alcohol can have several different effects in the cell. So the liver, again, the main function is, in this particular case, is to detoxify by destroying acetate or metabolizing ethanol into acetate and then oxidizing it, and then you lose it. But when there is too much of it, then you have several other implications, because there is only a limited capacity for the cells to be able to handle ethanol at once. That's why we say that when you drink moderately, small amounts, and if it's within the capacity of the liver to be able to handle this ethanol, then you probably be okay. But if you drink too much and too often, you overwhelm the capacity of the liver to be able to process it. And then you start accumulating these intermediary molecules that will have to be managed in different ways. And obviously, the more you take, more will escape in the circulation and also get to the brain. And if you get drunk, you may end up passing out. But again, it largely affects the brain, because this excess amount that escapes the liver will severely affect brain function. So what are the health implications of alcoholism? As I mentioned, fatty liver disease or hepatosteatosis, too much fat accumulated in the liver. Ketosis and ketoacidosis, and this is because alcohol also impairs the ability of the liver to produce glucose. So if you drink and you don't eat properly, this is that if glucose levels go down, liver cannot produce glucose through gluconeogenesis, and then it can lead to ketosis and ketoacidosis. Hypoglycemia, obviously, because if you cannot produce glucose, you cannot maintain your blood glucose levels within that narrow range that we always speak about. And also in the long run, especially in alcoholics, hepatic cirrhosis or hepatic scarring. And once hepatic cirrhosis occurs, most hepatic functions are lost, leading to impaired synthesis and production of albumin, proteins of blood coagulation, and other crucial serum proteins that will impact the function of many organs and tissues which depend on normal function of the liver. Some additional harmful effects. It's also inflammation of the esophagus, called esophagitis, and the stomach, called gastritis. Disruption of the normal communication between neurons, and I think this is an obvious one. You lose coordination and imbalance. It can also cause sleepiness, impaired cognitive function, directly related to this effect of alcohol in the brain. And it can also cause severe brain damage. So again, alcohol can be very damaging and devastating to multiple organs, and the brain is a major one. So is there any beneficial effect to alcohol consumption? There is some epidemiological data showing that there is an inverse relationship between moderate alcohol intake and the occurrence of coronary artery disease and stroke. And this is attributed to an increase in HDL and also some antioxidant effects, especially because some of the alcoholic beverages, they contain polyphenols. And also there is some reduction in the risk of cognitive impairment and dementia in the elderly. But again, this is all epidemiological data, and it's based on very moderate, small amounts of alcohol intake. Now, it's also important because in the literature we find that even low to moderate alcohol consumption is not free of risk. So some other epidemiological studies show that even small amounts can be associated, for instance, with increasing risk of breast cancer among women that consume low to moderate levels of alcohol. Also, an increased risk of developing hypertension in men consuming as little as 2 drinks per day. So the potential benefits of moderate alcohol ingestion do not seem to apply equally to all people. So it seems that some people can tolerate or handle better than others. So that's why it seems that we have, in some cases, it might have some protective effect. In some cases, you have some detrimental, leaning more towards the detrimental effect. So the point that we need also to emphasize is how much alcohol is considered safe to drink then. Because this idea of what is moderate intake or drink responsibly, how do we classify this? So the classification of what is considered safe to drink is 1 drink per day for women and 2 for men. And what is defined as a drink now? Because this is also very important. So it's the amount of a beverage that provides approximately 15 mL of alcohol. So it would be the equivalent of 45 mL, for instance, of vodka, because it's a much higher content of ethanol, so you need to drink much less. 150 mL of wine and 350 mL of beer. So it's limited to that. So as you can see, this is what is classified as safe to drink. So this is it, and we'll see you in the next. Bye for now.